Good evening and welcome to the Late Debate. We'll be talking about the new political landscape in the capital later in the show. But first tonight, the North Kensington Tower block fire. For the second time this month, it thrust London's emergency services centre stage and reminded us all of the dangers they face. Rarely since the war have so many Londoners witnessed such horrific scenes firsthand. It wasn't just the inferno which consumed Grenfell Tower, visible from across the capital, but the agonising cries for help carried on the still air of a warm summer night. Some of those who survived owe their lives without doubt to the teams of firefighters who put rescuing others before their own safety. Once again, members of London's emergency services were heroic, as they were 11 days earlier at London Bridge. Then it was unarmed police, paramedics and ambulance crews who ran towards the danger. Again, their bravery in the face of a marauding gang of knife-wielding terrorists meant the death toll was not as it might have been. Joining me now is Jim Fitzpatrick, the Labour MP for Poplar and Limehouse. He was a London firefighter for 23 years before becoming an East End MP in 1997, and he spent a couple of years as Minister for London and under Tony Blair. Jim, welcome. First of all, it's early days, but is anyone culpable?
Well, that's a question that will be examined by the public inquiry, which has been announced by the Prime Minister. It's obviously very tempting to point the finger of blame at the earliest stage because people feel the need to hold somebody responsible. But until there's a proper forensic examination of what actually went wrong, where the fire started, what was the cause, why did it spread as rapidly as it did, these questions have to be answered scientifically. And then we can actually identify what went wrong and whether anybody or which organisation might have been responsible. But it's too early at this point in time to point the finger from my point of view.
Your colleague David Lammy has talked about culpability and even corporate manslaughter. Is that something you don't share?
Well, David has apparently lost a friend in the fire. He's obviously, like many people in West London, and I was there last night, very, very angry. People need to be able to get a rational explanation for what went wrong and hold somebody responsible. So I understand that emotion, and that legislation is there, and it may very well be used, but from my point of view at this point in time, I think it's slightly premature.
So the Prime Minister announced a public inquiry today. Sadiq Khan was calling for one.
Yes.
Are you happy that it'll proceed at the pace needed?
Well, the questions have been asked of the ministers who held an informal briefing today and will continue to be asked. The terms of reference for the inquiry, who will be in charge of it, who the members will be and how long it will sit for. Public inquiries do have a tendency to be very long-winded, and what people want is the quickest possible analysis of what went wrong, some recommendations and some conclusions. And what we don't want is a long drawn-out inquiry running over a number of years. That would be just totally unsatisfactory.
But you can't rush these things if you're to get it right.
Indeed, and clearly the forensic examination of the scene will take a considerable amount of time. The technicians, the fire investigation team, the Met's forensic teams, the experts from government will have to identify exactly where the fire started and what the cause was, and as a result that's going to take some time because the whole building is going to have to be searched floor by floor. We've
yet to find out the full terms of reference of the public inquiry, but for you particularly, what do you think is the most essential thing that it looks into?
For me, the most essential thing is how do we stop this happening again? We know we've got the technology, for example, through suppression systems like fire sprinklers, where we can protect buildings and people much better than obviously the Grenfell Tower was protected. We don't need to reinvent the wheel as far as that's concerned. It was one of the recommendations of the Lewisham House inquiry that the government should look at using sprinklers far more extensively in tower blocks. That seems to be a solution, especially in blocks like Grenfell, which are undergoing major refurbishments. To start from scratch, obviously that's a much bigger task than if a building is undergoing a refurbishment, then you can make it part of that plan. We've got something like 4,000 of these blocks around the country. Government really has to get on and reassure people, the vast majority of whom are safe in their houses and in their homes, but they will be feeling very very apprehensive because of what they've seen this week.
You mentioned Lewisham House. That, of course, was the fire in 2009 in Camberwell when 6 people died. A number of recommendations after that. Are you surprised that the recommendation about retrofitting sprinkler systems didn't happen, or is there an explanation for that?
I am surprised. We have been...
It's very expensive, clearly.
Well, it is expensive, and we've been lobbying very hard on all new schools, as an all-party parliamentary group on fire. We've been lobbying very hard on all new schools that are being built, having sprinklers included. The government has resisted that. They've actually reversed the guidance to local education authorities from that which basically said you were encouraged to do it, so now which says, well, you should have a look at it. The emphasis has changed dramatically. We're trying to get that emphasis reverted and to encourage all schools to be sprinklered, because we're worried about something dreadful happening in one of our schools. And there's a lot of new schools being built all the time, simply because of the increasing population. I'm surprised that something hasn't happened so far. We keep pressing for more and more deployment of sprinklers because they are proven to be successful in combating and containing, if not extinguishing fires and protecting life.
There's also been criticism from Labour of Gavin Barwell as Housing Minister over another recommendation from Lewisham House, which was to simplify the planning and fire regulations. Is that criticism fair aimed at him?
Well, Gavin was only one of a number of ministers from the time that the recommendations were published in 2013, which covered building regulations, covered housing and covered fire. So 3 different sections in what was one ministry and then 2 departments. So he's only one. And I don't think it's fair that he's been singled out simply because he lost his seat and is now head of number 10. But obviously he will have to answer questions, the same as we all have to answer questions when we're in public office. The recommendations from Lewisham House about reviewing the building regulations, they should be done at least every 10 years. It was a major recommendations of the coroner's inquiry. It's now some 11 years since the last review and 4 years since the inquiry recommended they should be reviewed. And we've only got to look at the London skyline to see different methods of construction, different materials being used in buildings in our city. These recommendations, these rules for construction are absolutely critical to make sure our buildings are safe.
Can I just ask you about your time as a firefighter? We saw some absolutely heroic actions yesterday, indeed, also by the emergency services at London Bridge 2 weeks ago. Yep. What's it like to be in that situation, to go running into a building, a high-rise that's on fire, not knowing what danger you're in?
You'll be hard-pressed to find any firefighter who says anything other than a modest response to that question. We have by cliche been praising our emergency service workers because they run to danger when the rest of us are going away. They are trained professionals, the adrenaline is pumping, their training comes to the fore, their teamwork comes to the fore. They see a dangerous situation, they know they're the only people who can tackle it. They're totally focused on the job in hand. At Grenfell Tower, it would have been tackling the fire, it would have been organising the evacuation, it would have been effecting rescues. They don't have a lot of time to think about, goodness, what's this about? They can see the images, they can see it's serious, they can see that people need them, and that's their job, and they go.
Finally, Jim, you've managed to persuade Parliament to allow you a debate on Grenfell Tower.
That's going to take place a week on Monday. I'll have a half-hour adjournment debate at least with the appropriate minister, so I can ask questions on the record that informally Nick Hurd and Alok Sharma were answering today in response to colleagues' comments.
Jim Fitzpatrick, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us this evening. Now, when the general election was called, we all knew what the result was going to be. A Conservative landslide with Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party trampled into the dust. Wrong. And some of the biggest surprises of the night came here in London. To many Tories, it was unthinkable. Kensington, of all places, electing a Labour MP. Emma Dent-Coates' victory was the biggest upset in London. For the second successive general election, Labour increased its grip on the capital.
And I do hereby declare that Marcia Chantal de Cordova.
Battersea was the first seat to fall. Conservative Treasury Minister Jane Ellison saw her majority of almost 8,000 wiped out by Labour's Marcia de Cordova.
This was people power in action.
In Croydon Central, Gavin Barwell was always vulnerable. The Minister for London and Housing Minister was defending the Tories' tiniest majority in London, just 165. He was swept aside by Labour's Sarah Jones.
It's democracy. I think if you stand in a marginal seat, you know sometimes you're going to win and sometimes you're going to lose, and you have to respect the result. Twig, Stephen, Labour Party, 20,000.
20 years ago, Enfield Southgate became the totemic victory in Tony Blair's Labour landslide when Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo was ousted by surprise newcomer Stephen Twigg. Conservative David Burrows won it back in 2005, but last week Labour again grabbed Enfield Southgate.
The people of Enfield Southgate have spoken once again.
34,000.
In south-west London, Sir Vince Cable was one of two veteran Lib Dems returned to Parliament just 2 years after losing their seats to the Tories.
Kingston Surbiton has a Liberal voice again.
And in Kingston and Surbiton, Sir Ed Davey got his old job back.
It's an extraordinary thing, and I'm just so grateful to all of you.
The only bright spot in an otherwise bleak night for the Tories was Richmond Park. Zach Goldsmith saw off Liberal Democrat Sarah Olney 6 months after she defeated him in a by-election. But his once impressive majority of more than 20,000 was whittled down to just 45. Right, to make some sense out of all that and what's been going on since polling day, I'm joined by the new Labour MP for Lewisham West Penge, Ellie Reeves, the Conservative MP for Sutton Cheam, Paul Scully, who chalked up an 8% swing from the Lib Dems, and for the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, who won back his former seat of Kingston and Surbiton from the Conservatives. Welcome all of you. Ed, first of all, you've been back just a week and already there's a vacancy for Lib Dem leader. Are you interested?
Well, everyone's thinking about it. We're talking to colleagues, we're talking to families. We're all a bit surprised that Tim resigned when he did. We thought he was, he resigned with huge dignity, but many of us thought he would carry on a little bit longer. So there's lots of discussions going on in the Liberal Democrat family, and you'll hear soon enough.
But you aren't ruling yourself out?
No, not ruling myself out.
Paul, you chalked up an impressive swing, as we said. How did that happen?
Well, I think what we concentrated on in Sutton was on the issues at hand, was the track record over the last couple of years, working hard, meaning that you can actually have a hard-working local MP, and the ear of ministers, because rather than just sitting shouting shrill noises from the sidelines, I could actually speak to the Health Minister about the future of St Helier Hospital, about funding for schools with Justine Greening, and it's that kind of direct teamwork that really, I think, counted.
Ellie, you're the new MP here, yes. Newly elected, but Parliament's not that strange a place to you, is it? I mean, your sister's an MP, your husband's an MP, his parents before him were MPs. What does it feel like to walk in there finally with the same initials, MP, after your name?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. And the area that I've been elected for, Lewisham West Penge, is...
That's your home area,
exactly.
Isn't it?
I've lived there pretty much all of my life, my family there, and to walk in to Parliament as the representative for Lewisham West Penge, for me, is just a massive, massive privilege. I've never felt anything like it. It's fantastic.
Now, I want to ask all of you about the election itself. We heard in the campaign what the party leaders thought the election was all about. You have been out there knocking on doors, talking to real voters. Individually, what do you think that election was about? Ed?
Well, schools came up big time on the doorstep. There were lots of cuts to school budgets. We were going to lose the equivalent of 165 teachers if the budget went ahead. We also heard a lot about police cuts. Police cuts very serious. We lost 27 police officers since the last general election, and crime was going up. So it was those bread and butter issues which actually came through during the campaign.
So not Brexit at all?
Well, no, Brexit was there. Of course it was there, but more at the start than at the end. And as people engaged, as we talked on the doorstep, it was their local school, the local hospital, Kingston Hospital came up a lot, as well as the police.
So cuts is testament to Jeremy Corbyn's campaign, really, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think what we didn't do, unfortunately, was talk positively enough about what had been happening over the last couple of years. So it was a mixture of Brexit, public services, and a number of other things. But what we should realise is that the fundamentals were still there. We've still got last year the second fastest growing economy in the advanced in the G7, and we just didn't get that optimism and opportunity over.
You say you didn't talk about the positives. Did you do enough to demolish the Corbyn campaign?
Well, clearly not, otherwise we'd have got a better result.
And what do you think voters were most caring about?
Well, I think it was a mixture, depending on who you spoke to. I mean, there were people that really understood the fact that we're starting Brexit in talks on Monday, that we want to crack on and get that done. There were people that actually talked about the fact that they wanted to make sure that their schools are well funded, that the hospital, St Helier Hospital, like you were talking about, Kingston Hospital, had a solid future in the forthcoming years, and these things really did come out on the doorstep.
Ellie, what did you hear?
Well, I mean, I've met with parents, teachers, head teachers during the campaign, and there was a real message of school budgets getting cut year on year, and fears for the future. Concerns about the NHS and access to GP appointments and so on and so forth. And people wanted an alternative. I think people were really looking for the Labour Party to come out with a message of hope and an alternative to the austerity that had been taking place over the last 7 years.
Did you win because of or despite Jeremy Corbyn?
Oh, I mean, my majority, Lewisham West Penge, it went up to 23,000, and there was a real positive response on the doorstep to our manifesto and the agenda that we were putting forward under Jeremy Corbyn.
Your leader, Tim Farron, says he's resigning because he can't square politics with his faith. That's a bit of an indictment of modern politics, isn't it?
Well, I think the media treated him very badly in the interviews and focusing on those religious beliefs. I thought that was...
But he could clearly have come out earlier and said, I do not have a problem with the idea of gay relationships.
Well, he look at his voting record, and he leads a party who's been very strong.
Well, that's what he said, and he's now realised that it's not enough.
Well, because he had such a hard time from the media. I mean, I do think it's disgraceful. We should allow people to have their conscience, have their beliefs, and also then put forward their party's position. And I think the way he was examined by some of your colleagues was actually an indictment of the press. There are many Christians in the Liberal Democrats. I'm a Christian, and my faith is very important to me, but I hope that when people ask me about my faith and ask me about my politics, they won't go in the way that some people tried to go for.
But there's been that criticism within the party as well, with Brian Paddock stepping back from the front bench the day before.
Yes, but that followed on from I think the hounding that he got, because I think it was impossible for him to himself manage that. And what I think he did really well, though, is he moved off that agenda and started talking about the positive case that the Liberal Democrats had, particularly on schools, particularly on investment in the health service. And I think when he was heard, which wasn't often because people want to talk about different things, when he was heard, he got a very positive response.
Paul, you were at the 1922 committee, I presume, this week.
Yeah.
Theresa May made a pitch for keeping her job. Do you think she did enough?
I think she did a great job. She held her hands up, said, OK, fine, the campaign was not good. But we looked at how we move forward. And I think that's really important now, because we have had an uncertain result, and we've got to actually come together, govern in the national interest. We've got to start the Brexit talks on Monday and have that sense of stability and give some sense of certainty to businesses, to people around the country that are looking for us for leadership.
Realistically, how long do you think she's going to last?
Well, I think at the moment things are looking OK. Well, I don't see why this can't last.
Okay, it's not much of an endorsement.
Well, in terms of, I can't,
3 months?
No, I think a lot longer than that. I think a lot longer than that. We can start off with it. Let's get through the Queen's speech. Let's get through these opening Brexit negotiations, the first round of those. And I think she can go. If not the distance, a good chunk of the way.
There's a real credibility issue, isn't there? Because she fought this election on a message of strong and stable versus coalition of chaos. And look what we've got after the election.
Yeah,
it's a coalition of chaos.
But
with
the Conservatives,
DUP.
you see, the Conservatives, what they are, where they actually, I think, score over the other parties, they are pragmatists. They actually deal with what's in front of them. We have a hung parliament. We have a situation where we've got to govern in the national interest. As I said, Theresa May is the right person to actually have that dose of pragmatism.
And she's got a point, hasn't she? I mean, coalition of chaos has come back to bite you big time.
Well, no, it's an unfortunate mixture in the campaign, but as I say, what she's doing now is she's providing a sense of certainty. She's cracking on with the Queen's speech, she's cracking on with actually trying to involve as many people as she can, and she's also cracking on with making sure that our country, post-Brexit, has got a really positive future.
What's going to be in the Queen's speech? Because we had a campaign and a manifesto of chaos. I mean, Theresa May's campaign launch with a manifesto has to go down as one of the worst things I've ever seen a Prime Minister do. It fell flat within minutes, and therefore lots of the things that they were campaigning on, I think they're going to jettison, and that's going to be very interesting for people. You stood on that manifesto, Paul, and now the things that you were telling people you're going to do aren't going to happen, because actually your manifesto really was such a shambles.
I think that what happened, as I say, the campaign itself, an explanation around our fundamental background of the economy, about what we were aspiring for the next few years, wasn't the best. We didn't explain it, but actually,
what about the policy and care? What about the policy and care?
The Queen's speech itself doesn't get pre-written; it gets written now. So we've had those discussions with the DUP.
But it always comes from a manifesto.
We will write that now.
Your flagship policy, which you made a lot of in the manifesto launch, was about how you want to change the funding of care. That went down very badly because when it was examined, it fell apart.
Well, funny
it was
enough,
extraordinarily unfair.
Can I just ask?
Well, ironically, it was actually written largely by my predecessor, Paul Burstow, one of Ed Davey's colleagues.
Can I just ask you, that we mentioned the Queen's speech here. We've also talked this evening briefly about what happened at London Bridge. What, if anything, do any of you want to see in the Queen's speech about terror legislation, anti-terror legislation?
I mean, one of the things I want to see in the Queen's speech is investment in police, more police. We've seen the tremendous work that police and the emergency services have done over the last few weeks, and we need more resources channelled into that, and that absolutely has to be a priority.
Well, I strongly agree with that. We've had disastrous police cuts, particularly in the capital. We need to replace that. But moreover, we need to get the community police back, the visible community police. If you talk to the police themselves, and this came out from a recent Chief Inspector's report, the community police are the ones that get the intelligence, the ones that liaise with people and get that feeling, and that that help prevent problems. And linked to that, I would want to change the whole prevent strategy of the government to have what we call an engaged strategy. So you're really working with the communities to help them, and the police are closer to the communities. That's the only way you can tackle this.
Paul, what do you want to see in the Queen's speech?
Police numbers actually in the capital have actually stayed relatively stable.
Yes, but you said you heard the
years.
message on the doorstep about police cuts. Presumably, lots of MPs
I
like
didn't,
you
no,
are
I didn't say
reporting
actually.
that.
I didn't say about police cuts actually, but I was talking about public services and the things that were coming around about schools and the sort of false figures that were coming out on some of the websites about school cuts and these kind of things, which weren't strictly true. But in terms of police, the numbers have actually been stable. What I think we do need to do, we need to put more resources into our intelligence services.
Can I
we do actually have to
just very quickly, so we're running out of time, I want to
policing.
ask all of you very quickly, do you expect to be fighting another election in the next 6 months, yes or no?
I think that's probably highly likely.
No.
Really? You
Absolutely not.
OK, lovely. Thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us.
Because they think they'd lose more.
That's a bit cruel, bit underhand, but there we are.
It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Gentlemen, Ellie, thank you very much indeed
you.
for talking to us. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I'll be here next month with the latest instalment in what's turning out to be an extraordinary political year. Until then, from all of us here on The Late Debate, good night, and thank you very much for watching.